The sharp crack of a whip sliced through the chaotic din of the auction grounds. Luca flinched as the sound echoed, followed by the dull thud of a horse collapsing onto the wooden platform. The animal lay there, its flanks heaving, legs trembling like brittle sticks about to snap. A gruff man yanked at the halter, muttering curses under his breath. "Get up, you useless thing!" he snarled, raising the whip again. Luca's heart raced, his hands balling into fists at his sides. He had seen animals in poor shape before, but nothing like this. The horse's coat, once perhaps a proud grey, was now a dull, patchy mess, clinging to ribs that jutted out like broken planks on a sinking ship. Its eyes, though, those eyes held Luca captive. They weren't lifeless like the rest of its body. No, they were deep, haunting, pleading. A strange knot twisted in his chest, an ache he couldn't quite explain. The crowd shifted uneasily. "That thing's a goner," someone muttered. Another snorted, "Better off glue than a pasture." Laughter rippled through the spectators, but Luca barely heard them. The boy, barely 10 years old, stood rooted in place, his gaze locked with the horses. It wasn't fear in those eyes, it was a quiet desperation, a flicker of hope hanging by a thread. Luca's small fingers tightened around the crumpled bills in his pocket. He had saved every penny from odd chores and birthday gifts for this moment, dreaming of the perfect horse. Thunder, as he would later call it, was far from perfect. But in that instant, Luca felt an invisible pull, a connection stronger than reason. This horse needed him. And, in some inexplicable way, he needed the horse. "Next up," the auctioneer's voice boomed, drawing reluctant attention. One sorry excuse of a gelding. Sickly and stubborn, but hey, maybe one of you fine folks has the magic touch. A weak chuckle followed, but no hands went up. Luca swallowed hard, his mouth dry as sandpaper. He glanced around the crowd, searching for someone, anyone, who might give the horse a chance. The silence grew heavy, punctuated only by the animal's labored breaths. The auctioneer looked bored. "Well then, starting at $20. Do I hear 20? Nothing. Luca's hand shot up, surprising even himself. "I'll do it," he called, his voice cracking. The crowd erupted into laughter, and the auctioneer blinked, clearly startled. Well, we've got ourselves a bidder. $20 from the young man up front. Do I hear 25? Another long silence. Someone snickered. "What's the kid gonna do? Hug it back to life?" Luca's cheeks burned, but he kept his gaze steady. He wouldn't back down. Not now, not with those eyes watching him. "Sold!" The auctioneer brought down his gavel with a decisive thud. "To the brave young man for $20. He smirked, leaning over the podium. "Good luck, kid. You'll need it." Luca ignored the jeers and stares as he climbed the steps to the platform. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. The man with the whip tossed the lead rope toward him, muttering, "He's your problem now." Luca stepped closer, swallowing his nerves. The horse flinched, its ears pinning back as if expecting another strike. Slowly, Luca extended his hand, palm open, his voice soft, but steady. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The horse's nostrils flared, its muscles quivering. For a moment, Luca thought it might bolt, but then, almost imperceptibly, it leaned forward, its nose brushing against his fingers. A tiny, fragile thread of trust had been spun. Luca grinned, his breath hitching. "See? You're not so scary." He gave the rope a gentle tug, and the horse hesitated before stumbling to its feet. It swayed unsteadily, but Luca stood firm, one small hand on its neck. "Come on, buddy. Let's get you home." As they left the platform, Luca felt every eye on him. Some spectators whispered behind cupped hands, others shook their heads in disbelief. His mother, standing near the edge of the crowd, looked equal parts horrified and baffled. "Luca!" she hissed, hurrying over. "What were you thinking? That poor thing won't last a week." Luca met her gaze, his chin lifting stubbornly. "He's not poor. He's Thunder," he said, surprising himself with the name. "And he's going to be fine." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "We'll talk about this later." Thunder stumbled again as they made their way toward the trailer Luca's family had brought. Luca stopped, giving the horse a moment to steady itself. He crouched beside it, brushing a hand gently over its bony flank. "You'll see," he murmured. "We'll fix you up. You're going to be strong. Just wait." By the time they reached home, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the ranch in hues of gold and purple. Luca led Thunder toward the small paddock behind the barn, his mother watching from the porch with crossed arms. "It's not too late to give it back, you know," she called. Luca shook his head. "He's staying." The paddock was little more than a patch of grass enclosed by a weathered fence, but it was enough. Luca unlatched the gate and led Thunder inside. The horse stood there, motionless, its head drooping low. Luca crouched by the fence, resting his chin on his folded arms. "You're gonna like it here, Thunder," he whispered. "It's not much, but it's home." Thunder's ear twitched at the sound of his voice, and for a moment, Luca could have sworn the horse sighed. The days that followed tested Luca's resolve. Thunder refused to touch his food, lay motionless for hours, and seemed to have surrendered entirely. Luca, however, wasn't about to give up. Every spare moment was spent sitting near the paddock, either reading aloud or talking gently to the horse. One evening, as the sky turned a soft amber, Luca spoke softly, almost as if sharing a secret. "You remind me of Dad," he said, his voice tinged with a mix of sadness and determination. "He never gave up, no matter how tough things got." Luca's determination only grew stronger. He began digging through every book he could find on caring for malnourished horses, determined to find a solution. With guidance from Mr. Everett, a kind neighbor with a lifetime of ranching experience, Luca devised a plan. He prepared a special diet for Thunder, mixing oats, carrots, and restorative herbs, following Everett's advice down to the letter. On the 5th day, a small but significant breakthrough occurred. As Luca approached the paddock, holding a bucket of food, Thunder shifted slightly, his gaunt frame trembling. The horse took a cautious step forward, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the contents of the bucket. Luca froze, hardly daring to breathe, as Thunder leaned in and nibbled tentatively at the food. "That's it, Thunder. You can trust me," Luca whispered, his voice trembling with hope. From that moment, something began to change. The fragile connection between boy and horse grew a little stronger each day. Luca introduced simple routines to help Thunder adjust, brushing his coat with slow, deliberate strokes and speaking in a soothing tone. Short walks around the property became part of their daily rhythm. Though the progress was gradual, Thunder's strength began to return. His steps became steadier, and his coat slowly started to regain its shine. One late afternoon, as the sun cast long golden shadows across the yard, Luca decided it was time to take the next step. He retrieved an old saddle that had belonged to his father and brought it to the paddock. Standing beside Thunder, he placed a reassuring hand on the horse's neck. "I'm not gonna ride you just yet, buddy," he said softly, running his fingers through Thunder's mane. "We're just getting you used to the idea." To Luca's surprise, Thunder didn't recoil or flinch as the saddle was carefully draped over his back. For the first time, a glimmer of real hope flickered in Luca's chest. Perhaps this horse, once overlooked and dismissed, had the potential to be something extraordinary. Not everyone shared Luca's optimism, though. At the local feed store, whispers and laughter filled the air whenever Luca's name came up. "That boy's wasting his time," one man sneered as Luca browsed for supplies. "That horse'll never be anything more than a decoration out in some pasture." Luca heard the words, his fists clenching at his sides, but he refused to let the taunts rattle him. The bond he was building with Thunder meant more to him than anyone else's opinion. He didn't need anyone to tell him he'd made the right choice. Deep down, Luca knew Thunder was extraordinary, even if nobody else could see it. He was determined to prove it, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Weeks rolled into months, and Thunder began to change in ways Luca had hoped, but hardly dared to expect. The horse's once patchy, lackluster coat began to gleam under the golden rays of the sun. His movements, which had been slow and uncertain, grew smoother and more assured with every passing day. But it wasn't just Thunder's outward transformation that struck Luca. It was the connection between them, something deeper than words. Every morning, before the first hint of sunlight broke over the horizon, Luca would slip out of the house, a small bag of oats in one hand and a carrot in the other. As he approached the paddock, he'd call out softly, "Morning, buddy." Thunder would lift his head, whinnying a greeting, his ears flicking forward at the sight of Luca. The boy had learned to read the horse's subtle signals. A flick of the tail, the angle of his ears, the way he shifted his weight. Each gesture told a story, unspoken but deeply understood. One day, Luca decided it was time to take their training to the next level. With the saddle strapped securely on Thunder's back and a lead rope held lightly in his hand, he led the horse out of the paddock and toward the open field. The vast expanse of their ranch stretched out before them, the rolling grasses shimmering under the morning dew. Luca paused, placing a steadying hand on Thunder's neck. "All right, let's see what you can do," he murmured, giving the horse a gentle pat. At first, Thunder moved cautiously, his steps deliberate, as though testing the ground beneath him. But then, as the crisp morning air swept through the field, something shifted. With a sudden burst of energy, Thunder broke into a canter. His powerful legs churned the earth beneath him, dirt flying in his wake. Luca stood still, awestruck, watching the raw beauty and strength of the horse he'd poured so much of himself into. Thunder wasn't just running, he was reclaiming something that had been lost. It wasn't all smooth sailing. One afternoon, while Luca was working with Thunder on groundwork exercises, the horse abruptly reared, his nostrils flaring and his eyes wide with panic. Luca's heart jumped as he tightened his grip on the lead rope. "Easy, boy, easy," he said, his voice steady but low. Thunder's terror was almost tangible, his body taut like a coiled spring. It took nearly an hour of patient coaxing before the horse finally calmed. That night, Luca sat beside the paddock, replaying the moment over and over in his mind. "What scared you, Thunder?" he wondered aloud, his gaze fixed on the stars above. Then he remembered something his dad used to say. Horses don't just fear what's in front of them, they fear what's behind them too. The realization hit Luca like a bolt of lightning. Whatever Thunder had endured in the past still clung to him, like shadows he couldn't shake. Determined to help, Luca decided to take a different approach. The next day, instead of pushing Thunder through exercises, Luca spent hours simply being near him. He sat quietly by the paddock or brushed Thunder's coat with slow, deliberate strokes, speaking softly about anything and everything. He also began incorporating the gentle techniques his father had taught him, methods that prioritized trust and understanding over control. One evening, as the sky blushed with hues of orange and pink, Luca decided it was time to try riding Thunder for the first time. He approached the horse with the saddle in hand, his movements deliberate and calm. "This is it, buddy," he said, his voice even, one step at a time. To his amazement, Thunder stood steady, allowing Luca to mount. Luca's heart pounded as he settled into the saddle, equal parts excitement and trepidation. "Let's take it slow," he whispered, nudging Thunder gently. The horse moved forward, his steps sure and measured, and soon the two were moving together as if they were one. As they returned to the barn, Luca noticed a figure leaning against the fence. It was Mr. Everett, their neighbor, and the man who'd offered Luca advice when Thunder was at his weakest. The older man tipped his hat, a rare smile softening his weathered face. "You've done something special here, Luca," he said. "That horse, he ain't just better. He's alive again. And so are you." Luca felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Thanks, Mr. Everett," he said quietly, leading Thunder back to the paddock. As he watched the horse settle in, Luca realized their journey together was far from over. Thunder's transformation wasn't just about strength or speed. It was about trust, resilience, and the bond they had built. But just when everything seemed to be falling into place, a curveball arrived. On a bright Saturday morning, the rumble of an engine broke the peaceful silence of the ranch. A shiny black truck rolled up, and a group of strangers stepped out, their polished boots gleaming in the sun. The man at the front, tall and sharp-eyed, introduced himself as Mr. Callum. "We've heard about your horse," he said, his gaze fixed on Thunder as the horse grazed peacefully in the paddock. "He's incredible, and we'd like to offer you a chance to showcase him at the county's annual equestrian fair." Luca's breath caught. The county fair was no small event. It was the pinnacle of equestrian competition. Before he could respond, his mother stepped forward, her tone firm. "We appreciate the offer, but Thunder isn't a show horse. He's part of this family now." Mr. Callum's grin stretched across his face, but there was a noticeable edge to his voice. "What a pity," he said, his words laced with feigned regret. "A horse like that deserves to be seen, but if you change your mind, you know where to find us." With those parting words, he and his associates climbed into their truck and drove off, leaving behind a tension that seemed to linger in the air long after they were gone. Luca couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Over the next few days, he began noticing peculiar things. Deep tire tracks in the dirt near the edge of the ranch, ones that didn't match any vehicles they owned. At night, Thunder seemed unusually restless, pacing his paddock as if sensing something Luca couldn't see. Then, late one evening, disaster struck. Luca bolted upright in bed, startled by frantic whinnies cutting through the quiet of the night. The acrid smell of smoke hit his nose moments later. His heart dropped. Throwing off his blanket, he raced outside to find the paddock engulfed in flames, bright orange tongues licking up the wooden posts and sending plumes of black smoke spiraling into the sky. "Thunder!" Luca shouted, his voice cracking as he spotted the horse trapped inside. Thunder reared in terror, his powerful legs kicking at the gate that wouldn't budge. Luca didn't think twice. Grabbing a soaked blanket from the laundry line, he ignored his mother's desperate shouts from the porch, begging him to stop. The heat was suffocating, but he pressed forward, his focus unyielding. "Easy, boy! I'm here!" Luca yelled, his voice steady despite the chaos. Thunder's wild eyes darted toward him, and for a fleeting moment, the horse stilled. Luca seized the chance, throwing the wet blanket over Thunder's back. Moving quickly, he unlatched the gate and led the horse out to safety, away from the collapsing paddock. By the time the fire was extinguished, the paddock was little more than a charred skeleton. Exhausted and shaking, Luca collapsed onto the ground, coughing as Thunder gently nudged him with his muzzle. It was then that something caught his eye, glinting faintly in the ashes. Crawling closer, he reached out and picked up a silver lighter, its surface scratched but unmistakable. His stomach turned. "This wasn't an accident," he whispered, his hands trembling around the lighter. The following morning, the sheriff arrived to investigate. Luca explained what had happened, showing him the lighter, but there wasn't much to go on. Without clear evidence, there was little the authorities could do. Luca couldn't shake his suspicions of Mr. Callum and his men, but for now he kept his thoughts to himself. Determined to protect Thunder, Luca poured his energy into fortifying the ranch. With Mr. Everett's help, he rebuilt the paddock using stronger materials, installed motion-sensitive lights, and even set up a camera to keep watch at night. Yet, no matter how hard he tried to reassure himself, a lingering sense of unease clung to him. Despite the fear, Luca refused to let it overshadow the bond he had with Thunder. Their connection only deepened after the fire. Thunder, once cautious and hesitant, began responding to Luca's every cue with a precision that felt almost uncanny. The horse seemed to understand him in ways Luca couldn't explain, executing maneuvers with a grace that left even Luca's skeptical mother stunned. One warm evening, as Luca led Thunder through a series of practiced movements in the newly rebuilt paddock, Mr. Everett leaned against the fence, watching with a small smile. "That horse of yours," he said, his voice filled with admiration, "isn't just special. He's something extraordinary." Luca paused, running a hand along Thunder's neck. "Thanks, Mr. Everett," he said quietly. The older man nodded, his expression serious. "And so are you, Luca. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Luca felt a warmth rise in his chest. Thunder's transformation wasn't just about proving his worth to others. It was about proving something to himself. But the fire wasn't the end of their challenges. Months passed, and life on the ranch began to settle into a rhythm again. Thunder thrived under Luca's care, his coat gleaming like polished silver under the summer sun. Word of their bond began to spread, drawing curious visitors eager to see the boy and his remarkable horse. One afternoon, as Luca guided Thunder through a routine, the familiar rumble of a black truck approaching the ranch caught his attention. He froze, his hand tightening around the lead rope. Mr. Callum stepped out, his polished demeanor replaced by something more hurried, almost desperate. "We have a proposition," Callum began, his tone attempting to sound friendly but carrying an unmistakable urgency. "The regional horse competition is coming up in 2 weeks. Thunder could be the star of the show. We'll cover all the costs, sponsor you. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." Luca's mother, standing nearby, crossed her arms. "And what's in it for you?" she asked, her voice cool and cautious. Callum hesitated, then admitted, "Our organization's reputation has taken a hit recently. A win with Thunder would help restore it." Luca looked at Thunder, standing tall and proud beside him. He could see through Callum's motives. They weren't about admiration for the horse, but about salvaging his own standing. Still, Luca also saw the chance to prove what Thunder could do, not for Callum, but for everyone who had doubted them. "We'll do it," Luca said firmly, surprising everyone, even his mother. The next 2 weeks were grueling. Luca and Thunder trained tirelessly, perfecting each step, jump, and maneuver until they moved as one. On the day of the competition, the stadium buzzed with excitement. But when Luca and Thunder entered the arena, the crowd fell silent. The announcer's voice rang out, carrying a note of admiration. And now, a local boy and his once-forgotten horse, ready to show us the meaning of perseverance. Luca placed a reassuring hand on Thunder's neck. "Let's show them who we are," he whispered. As the duo began their performance, Thunder moved with a grace and power that captivated the audience, proving with every flawless leap and turn that even the most overlooked could rise to greatness. The crowd erupted with thunderous applause as Luca and Thunder executed their final move, a daring, perfectly timed leap over the tallest obstacle on the course. The moment their hooves touched the ground, the roar of the audience grew even louder, shaking the stadium with its energy. While the judges worked to calculate the scores, Callum, who had once been so smug and dismissive, made his way toward Luca. The arrogance that had defined him earlier was gone, replaced by a quiet sincerity. "You've got something real special, kid," he admitted, tipping his hat slightly. "I shouldn't have doubted you." When the results were announced, the cheers seemed to grow impossibly louder. Luca and Thunder hadn't just won their category, they had captured the hearts of everyone who witnessed their journey. The trophy, gleaming and grand, was handed to Luca, but it wasn't the shiny prize that meant the most to him. Later that evening, back at the ranch, Luca sat by the paddock, the distant hum of crickets filling the air. He watched Thunder grazing under the fading light, his coat shimmering faintly in the sunset's glow. Luca's thoughts wandered over the path that had brought them here. Thunder wasn't just a horse. To Luca, he was the embodiment of resilience, a testament to trust, and proof that even those overlooked and underestimated could rise to greatness with love and persistence. The morning sun spilled across the fields of Luca's ranch, casting golden hues over the paddocks and barn. Thunder stood tall near the fence, his coat gleaming as if he knew he had become something extraordinary. Across the yard, Luca watched him from the porch, a steaming mug of coffee warming his hands. It was hard to believe how far they'd come. From that chaotic day at the auction to now, their story had become something neither of them could have imagined. It started small. A local journalist had heard about their win at the county fair and written an article titled "The Boy and the Broken Horse, a Tale of Second Chances." Within days, the piece went viral. First, people in neighboring towns came by to see them. Then, larger publications picked up the story. By the time a camera crew from a national news network rolled into town, Luca and Thunder had become household names. The ranch soon buzzed with activity. Visitors arrived daily, some with cameras, others with notebooks, all eager to document the bond between Luca and Thunder. Reporters often asked the same question: "What made you choose him that day?" Luca's answer never wavered. "I didn't choose Thunder," he'd say with a small smile. "He chose me." Despite the whirlwind of attention, Luca refused to let it change who they were. He kept their routine simple: early mornings, quiet rides, and time spent tending to the ranch. The fame was flattering, but for Luca, the real reward was seeing how their story inspired others. Letters poured in, handwritten notes from children, emails from horse trainers, even a message from an old rancher who said Thunder reminded him of a horse he'd loved as a boy. Each letter carried the same sentiment: hope. As the months turned into years, the ranch evolved. What had once been a quiet family farm became a sanctuary for animals and a learning center for people. Luca called it Thunder's Haven. He and his mother built additional paddocks, opened a small visitors center, and invited experts to hold workshops on animal care and rehabilitation. Children from nearby towns came for field trips, wide-eyed as Luca shared Thunder's journey. One summer, they held an open house, complete with hay rides, demonstrations, and a chance for kids to meet Thunder up close. The line to see him stretched halfway across the property. Luca watched as a shy boy approached Thunder, hesitating at first but eventually reaching out to stroke the horse's neck. Thunder stood perfectly still, his gentle eyes locking onto the boy's. The sight made Luca's chest tighten. That moment, he realized, was what all the hard work had been for. Still, the attention wasn't always easy. Not everyone understood the bond Luca and Thunder shared, and some critics dismissed their story as sentimental nonsense. "Just a lucky horse with a good trainer," one article had said. Luca ignored the negativity, choosing instead to focus on the good they were doing. For every skeptic, there were 100 others who believed. And then there were the challenges. Thunder wasn't young anymore, and his health required careful monitoring. Luca spent countless nights by his side, especially during the colder months when the aches in Thunder's legs flared up. Each time, Luca thought about that first day, how fragile Thunder had seemed and how far they'd come together. No matter how tired he was, Luca never left Thunder's side when he needed him. One crisp autumn evening, Luca stood by the paddock, watching Thunder graze as the sun dipped low on the horizon. The media buzz had quieted down over the years, though their story still appeared in magazines and documentaries from time to time. These days, life felt peaceful again, just the way Luca liked it. He leaned on the fence, his hands rough from years of ranch work, but steady as ever. "You know, buddy," he said softly, "if someone told me back then we'd end up here, I'd have laughed 'em off the ranch." Thunder flicked his tail, his ears twitching at Luca's voice. Luca chuckled, "But I'm glad we didn't listen to him. Look at all we've done." As the sky shifted from gold to deep amber, Luca let himself reflect. Thunder wasn't just a horse. He was proof that broken things could be mended, that love and patience could rewrite the ending of any story. Together, they had faced fire, both literal and figurative, and come out stronger. Luca felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for Thunder, but for everything their journey had taught him. Behind him, the farmhouse door creaked open, and his mother stepped out, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "Sunset's beautiful tonight," she said, joining him at the fence. "Yeah," Luca replied, his voice quiet. "It is." They stood there together, watching as the last light of day bathed the ranch in warm, fading colors. Thunder lifted his head, his silhouette strong against the horizon. To Luca, it was more than just a sunset. It was the closing of a chapter, a reminder of every challenge they'd overcome. In that moment, Luca felt something shift within him. It wasn't sadness or even nostalgia. It was peace. He glanced at his mother, then back at Thunder, a soft smile playing on his lips. He knew their story would live on, not just in headlines or letters, but in the hearts of everyone they touched. As the final rays of light disappeared and the stars began to blink into view, Luca placed a hand on the fence and said quietly, "You did good, Thunder. Real good." And in his heart, he knew his father would have been proud. Wow, what a journey Luca and Thunder took us on. Although this story isn't based on real events, it's packed with lessons that feel so personal and real. At its core, it's about resilience, compassion, and believing in second chances, not just for others, but for yourself. Think about it. Thunder, once discarded and overlooked, becomes a symbol of hope, all because one boy saw value where no one else did. That connection between them, so fragile at first, grows into an unbreakable bond, proving that with patience and love, even the most broken can heal. But what I love most is how their story reminds us of the power of persistence. Luca doesn't give up, even when people laugh at him or when circumstances seem impossible. He faces challenges head-on, whether it's rebuilding a paddock or standing up to those who doubt him. And that's such an inspiring message, isn't it? This story also makes us reflect on our own lives. How often do we overlook something or someone because they don't fit our idea of perfect? Maybe there's a thunder in all of our lives waiting for us to take a chance. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What did this story teach you? Do you have your own thunder moment, a time you believed in something others didn't? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about it. And hey, if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because the more we share stories like this, the more we spread the message that hope, kindness, and perseverance can truly change lives. Thanks for being here. See you next time.